Okay, everybody, I think it's time to kick off.
Great.
My name's Sarah Fisher from Open Eye Gallery, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We've got an amazing lineup with some very knowledgeable people actually sitting here who are going to speak to you today about whose high street is it anyway. All of us are interested in unlocking creative futures in our town centres. It's been our privilege to be working with the international artist Casey Orr. We all know of Wayne Hemingway's work and the brilliant Neil Harris, who is transforming Wigan with culture. And we're also incredibly happy to welcome Ellen Harrison, who's head of creative programs and campaigns at Historic England and has done so much for our high streets. But I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get down to a conversation. It is being recorded, this event, so you can share it with friends afterwards. And also, I would ask you to please do put questions in the chat, because we'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts and reflections on what the panelists say. We'll be taking questions at the end, but if you'd like to put questions in as we go along, that would be fabulous. So let's start. Wayne, could I ask you to introduce yourself? I'm not sure anybody needs an introduction to Wayne Hemingway, but if you could introduce yourself, please.
Wayne Hemingway, MBE, which I never use, but I thought today, why not? A designer, a partner at Hemingway Design. We've been going for 41 years, something like that. We've got a lot of experience in retail because our first brand was Red or Dead, which we built 23 shops and became quite a well-known label. We sold that 24 years ago, and since then Hemingway Design is a multidisciplinary design agency. The thing we do more than anything, I think, is we concentrate more on urban design. We're urban, most of the team here are urban designers, but we concentrate on two aspects of urban design. One is town centres, and the second is coastal resorts. There are two specialisms. And we have a large placemaking events team. So we do major town centre events in Blackburn, in all around the UK.
And I think many people will have been privileged to actually be part of or connected to those events. So yeah, I think it's amazing that we have you with us. And could I now go to, I'm going on my screen, could I go to Casey? We've had the privilege of working with an amazing international artist in town centres. And Casey, I wonder if you could just explain a little bit about your practice and about Saturday Girl.
Yeah, hi, I'm Casey Orr. My project, Saturday Girl, I've been traveling around UK towns and cities for the last 10 years, photographing fashion and style on the high streets. And I did this work I started in Leeds. I'm not from the UK, and I love Northern style so much. And I love how expressive and how just love British style. And you can see it all over the streets and the towns and cities. And so I started this project where I wanted to explore kind of what that meant. What does it mean regionally, and how is it being used as a kind of as a language for people to express who they are and to find their tribes and connect with people. So I did this project for quite a long time, and then the pandemic hit, and suddenly the spaces where I'd go and find people to photograph, and where we'd always kind of go off and look for, set up at Topshop and set up my backdrops, and that basically it all disappeared. And I started having conversations with Sarah Fisher about actually there's something important going on. And when young people come out from this, they're going to be changed, and how we'll be able to read that through the way that they want to be visibly, and how can we read that through how they are on the street. And then the other part of that was that the streets have changed so much. And how can we kind of look at that? So, and see where those two things come together, where people and the streets come together. So that's my project.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Casey. And Neil, I wonder if you could talk about yourself and also obviously Wigan and what you're doing there in relation to High Street.
Hi, so I'm Neil Harris. I'm business manager for Culture, Arts and Heritage here in Wigan Council. I've worked across a number of local authorities and cultural organisations across the Northwest over a growing number of years now, and always it's the most interesting aspect is where that juxtaposition of kind of usage and form comes together to develop some really creative aspects. I think what we're doing at the moment in Wigan is really revitalising an amazing town through cultural endeavour, and the launch of the Cultural Manifesto, The Fire Within, in 2019 genuinely was developed and created by the cultural organisations and cultural partners locally, and is acting as an amazing framework from which we can develop a sustained but also really exciting programme of activity across the borough and linking in with huge big programmes. So we've got the Euros, Women's Euros coming next week. And a major component of that is how we can use our town centres to really help celebrate major sporting or other activities and really engage our communities in that opportunity to make and create and just hone in on those well-being elements that culture can bring, which is really, really important after the last couple of years that we've had.
Brilliant, thank you, Neil. And last but obviously not least, Ellen.
Hi everyone, I'm Ellen, I'm from Historic England. If you haven't heard of us, we're a public body and we seek to celebrate and champion the historic environment in all its forms. And a really, really big part of our work at the moment is our High Street Heritage Action Zone scheme. It's in more than 60 high streets across England. And I work with my team to oversee a cultural programme which is supporting a £94 million regeneration programme across these high streets. And the cultural programme is a series of grant-funded programmes that are locally delivered. They are co-created with local people and they are representative of those places. We simply support and facilitate those. And we also run a kind of a thread, if you like, of national commissions, which I may end up talking about this evening as well, which help to kind of bring the programme together and make it a bit more cohesive. And I suppose if I could sum up in a sentence why I'm so passionate about the High Street Cultural Programme, it is because it is giving people an opportunity and the thinking space to look at what high streets could become and how they can support local communities as well. And I'm really pleased to be here.
Thank you, and that's a brilliant lead-in actually to the first question, which is kind of coming to you from your own personal perspective or your own thinking. What changes do you think you've seen or witnessed in the high street, particularly over the last few years? And how has that affected what you do? Again, if we could start with Wayne, if that's possible.
Well, I think the changes that are taking place are certainly not one-dimensional, and in some ways they're not changing at all. First thing is that this is probably we're not in a time of high street. It's not the end of the high street. We're in a transition. We're in a transition period, and it's a really exciting transition, and it's being led. And this is where it gets quite controversial, and not everybody will agree with me. But most things that are positive change get led by a relatively small amount of people who are at the forefront of societal change and shift. They're often deep thinkers, and usually they're doing things with purpose. That they're usually purposeful. So at the moment we've got, you have to bear with me a little bit here, because there's a lot of, this is very nuanced and quite a difficult subject really. And we do loads of work on researching this, so much work on researching it. We are the thought leaders for, I'm not going to say who we are, but some of the biggest retailers in the UK. And so we're doing deep research on this. This is not me speaking, this is research that's speaking. So what you're getting is a relatively small part of the population, which are, the Daily Mail would class them as woke, that horrible way that they go about things, who are deciding to shop in a different way. Topshop closed, not because, and Debenhams closed, and BHS closed, not because of the internet. That contributed to it, but they're closed because they weren't in touch with enough of the direction of travel of society. They're old-fashioned, and it started with Woolworths back in the day. You know, when they were selling pick and mix on a high street, when that belongs to a small corner shop. So people were going back to the corner shop and not buying the pick and mix from Woolworths for all the right reasons. So you've got this niche amount of people, but a big enough niche to change profits, who are deciding that purpose is important. The growth in the charity shop sector is phenomenal, 7% up a year on year for the last few years. And the charity kind of gives everybody the answer to this, because when you look at who is buying in the charity shops, it is not people are not buying. Well, there is a small percentage of people who are buying because of the cost of living crisis, that they are changing their habits to shop in there because of cost of living, but the majority are changing their habits from fast fashion. But it's still a minority sport. So at the moment, we're doing a vision for Basingstoke, which is basically one big shopping centre, is a town centre of Basingstoke. And when you do the research, and we've researched 6,000 people in depth, spending half an hour with 6,000 people, you'll find that the vast majority of people actually want Primark, but there's enough people who absolutely hate Primark to drive the change. And we all know, and I'm sure everybody on here knows what the change they want, and that's that change to a town centre that is not about fast fashion and not about that stupid 80s thing, shop till we drop, and is about society, about people getting together, about look, my story is of going as a 12-year-old to watch David Bowie at King George's Hall in Blackburn, being inspired by that, going out, getting a haircut when I had hair, but buying the clothes, buying the records, and then starting to go out to Wigan Casino, and from a very young age becoming that the town centres were about dancing. Met my wife in Angels in Burnley. And about socializing and about watching football. They weren't the side effect was going out shopping. We have to get back to that, but don't think that we're just heading straight back there right now, because the stats don't show that.
So many really interesting things in there, Wayne, and I think could pick up a few. I know from working with Saturday Girl, one of the things that came out from that was young people talking about shopping in charity shops again, which they did when I was young, and then there seemed to be less of it for a while in terms of young people. But certainly that was the case, wasn't it? That actually charity shops have become more interesting to people. And I don't know whether you want to comment on that, Casey.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you were saying, Wayne, because I feel like I'm going around photographing young people and trying to get a sense of kind of where we're going like as a society and as a culture, and are they wearing it? Is there clues to that? And it's very different now than it was a couple of years ago for so many reasons. I mean, there's this, that there's like that people are wearing like there's a lot of kids going to charity shops and working class kids in northern towns. There's this huge thing there's about the non-binary thing, and there's like this non-gendered thing, and you can read it the way they look. There's lots of kids choosing their own names, like in a punk way. I wasn't seeing that before the pandemic. Lots of like witch symbols and crystals and stuff that kind of like symbolizes for me, I think when I speak to them, I think they've kind of had enough of what they were sold as values, really, because as it turned out, none of it supported them. Schools were shut and all their kind of high streets are shut, and it's as if there's this new value system coming in that has to do with imagination and a lot of creativity. I see it everywhere. And I'm in, northern towns with working class kids. It's really, really different than the kind of photographs I was taking and the kids I was speaking to 5 years ago. It's exciting.
And Neil, have you found the shifts in Wigan?
Yeah, it's really interesting just to hear those two perspectives. And I think from what Wayne was saying, we're not seeing if I'm walking down the high street, and a very personal take on this, a massive difference in the demographic and the way the town centre is being used. You know, the young people are still very much treating it as their space and reinterrogating it in an open way, which is just fantastic. And then, you know, there are other community groups who need that town centre as a point at which they can come together, and whether that's to, you know, just communicate with others or to celebrate in different ways. I mean, the big difference has been with more people working at home. You know, it has been a centre for office-based workers within Wigan, and you've seen that shift. So the lunchtime dash or the after work kind of preamble before going home has been lost to a degree. It's beginning to come back in now, but the nighttime is still the same. It's still vibrant. It's still kind of going. So I agree. It's an exciting transition stage. The backdrop to that is what's changing. So we are seeing those closures. We are seeing new companies, new retail offer, new charity offers coming through. And I think it's a really interesting take that Wayne's put on that. And, you know, added to that, what Casey's saying about those young people, they will drive a lot of the change in terms of, you know, their perceptions of what they want to see their town being. And I know when we took a temporary space in the shopping centre that is now being redeveloped, you know, it's interesting that over 70% of the visitors that we had and the engagements that we had in that space were young people. And part of it was because they just loved the space and they loved to kind of take on that space. And it's kind of seeing them refined now that that's closed to them for a period, finding new spaces, finding new ways to use that town centre. And it's interesting in terms of that development, we will see about 50% of that being residential. And I think that's going to be the other kind of change for me. How does that impact, you know, having more and more people living in not city centres where we've become more accustomed to it, but within that town centre setting, which historically is what happened anyway, but it's kind of coming back with a force and right in the middle of those centres. And I'm really intrigued to see how that will kind of change the dynamics again.
And lastly, but again, not least, Ellen, obviously you've got that national perspective particularly when you're looking at that cultural engagement with the high street through the high street and action zones. So I'm really interested to get your response partly to what others have said, but also that sense of, you know, the feedback that's coming from those centres that you're working with so closely.
Well, I think it really echoes what's been said so far, particularly, Neil, you were saying about residential. Quite a few of the schemes that we're supporting are turning the kind of the top above shops back into residential spaces as well. And I think we did some polling that showed that 50% of people felt more connected to their high street since the pandemic. And I think it's precisely because people are looking at literally what is on their doorstep now, and they're reassessing their relationship to that space. And Sarah, you asked about the kind of feedback from the cultural programme, and there is this, I'm really pleased to say, this emphasis on working with younger people throughout a lot of the cultural programmes, really trying to kind of centre, well, what is it that they would like to see from these places, because they're inheriting them. And also, as you say, Casey, they have the imagination and the kind of freedom to be able to look at these places differently. So that's definitely coming through very strongly. But also another thing you mentioned, Neil, was around the different groups of people who are using the high street for very practical reasons and kind of and for routine reasons, if you like. It tends to be older people, and we also see kind of projects that are supporting intergenerational discussion and communication as well. And I think that's a really important point to make, that these, I think high streets are flexible spaces. They change depending on the time of day or what day of the week, and I think they can be very generous and accommodate lots of different groups of people at the same time.
And I think, you know, that has always been the case, that there's lots of different people in high streets. One of the things that I've kind of noticed I want to pick up is that thinking about that younger generation. And I know when I was younger, when I was on the high street, when I was buying Red or Dead, actually, particularly, you know, the shoes, who didn't buy them, you know?
Thank you for contributing to my well-being.
I contributed, absolutely, in the early stages. But what I remember is that, you know, for many of us that were growing up then, and we were interested in alternative kind of cultures. Most of us were trying to be punks, and do you know what I mean? We were trying to discover identity. And one of the things that I remember about that time was there was a general disdain for young people on the high street. You know, there was this sort of sense of it not being the space. So I'm quite interested we've talked quite a bit, young people have come up quite a lot. I'm quite interested to kind of hear your experiences and your kind of thinking about how that question of whose high streets is it anyway, is how do we embrace that next generation of users of the high street? How do we make sure they know it's theirs?
I'm happy to start on that. I mean, you've got to understand that, you know, back then there was no marketing agencies that were advising landlords and advising retailers, and things just happened naturally. But today, everybody wants the youth, because that, you know, that they want to grab the youth young, whatever sector you're in, they want to grab young people, because cynically, that, you know, you grab them young and you make your income all the way through. So young people are knocking on an open door at the moment, a door that's massively ajar. And whether you're working with Landsec or any of the other big landlords, they want new ideas. You know, they don't want the next BHS, because they know they've done their research. They know the next BHS ain't coming. And so right now, it's a fantastic time to have ideas. I don't think there's been a time quite like this. It was when we started out in 1980, 81, it was relatively easy, especially in inner cities. London had lost 25% of its population. It was down to 7.5 million. Manchester was hollowed out. So starting in Affleck's Palace, starting in Covent Garden and Camden and all those places that we started in Quiggins, in Liverpool, and in the Royal Exchange in Leeds, the cities were hollowed out. And so we could open shops. We had no money, but it didn't matter, because the landlords would just give you them for £10 a week or something like that. We're back in that situation, not where you can, if you've got an idea today, you can, and you're bold and you're brazen in some way, and if a town has got anything about it, and a council's got anything about it, there are progressive, interesting, dynamic businesses can get a foothold. It's relatively easy in the heritage action zones of Lowestoft. You know, we're working in Swindon with you at the moment, and working in Lowestoft. There are opportunities. Councils, progressive councils, are buying properties at 50,000, 100,000. We worked in Blackburn. The story of Blackburn is really interesting. In around about 2010, we were asked to work. That's the town I was brought up in. We were asked to work there, and there's a street called Town Hall Street, and basically all the shops were empty. The council was able to buy them for around about £15,000 each. You know, I know that's very cheap, but that's what it is in some towns. And we came up with an idea of what was called performance making, where we put in every single shop was given to a maker, because Blackburn is known for manufacturing. And as long as you made something, whether it was bikes, chocolate, T-shirts, jewelry, and did it in the shop window and opened Thursday, Friday, Saturday, then the shop was yours, and you could sell the stuff behind, but you had to make things in the window. And that street just completely regenerated, because it became performance making. And on the back, when you do something, then the brilliant Arts Council or Historic England and all these great bodies, then they want to help that to make it go even further, because, you know, success breeds success. So we were able to open the first making rooms outside of a major city with a grant of whatever it was, $250,000 from the Arts Council, and then the National Festival of Making, which in Blackburn, which has been going for many years now, came out of that. But the whole thing is about doing something that's meaningful in place. You know, that was meaningful in Blackburn, because Blackburn has got the highest proportion of people getting up in the morning and going to work and making things, empirically proved. You know, the second is Skelmersdale in the UK, and Blackburn actually has got 3 times the amount of Manchester or London in terms of people who make things with their hands every day. So what a town centre needs is not to do things that are just like every other town centre, but to understand place and understand history, and then we use that history to make a new history, and that's what successful places are doing right now.
I mean, that's a brilliant thought for everyone. What you're really saying there, it's meaningful to the actual place. There's a relationship to the actual place. And I think that leads nicely, just asking you, Casey, because obviously in your work, you're putting the people of that place and their identities onto the high street. They're basically saying, this is my place, guys, you know, I'm here. In a similar way, I mean, obviously not the same as the makers, but you are putting them on the high street effectively.
Yeah, I mean, what I want is for these young people to kind of, I want to say, you know, hey, look, this is for you to make. There's an opportunity here. There's change going on. What do you want this place to be? Like, this is yours. And that's why, you know, I work in that way. I work on the street and with the backdrops on the street or in empty spaces to kind of say, look what you could do. You know, and have talks with people about, hey, what could you do here? Because I want them to, you know, just really use their wild imaginations to kind of decide what world are we gonna live in, and to have them on the streets, their portraits, the portraits of their friends, these giant pictures, to kind of say, like, we own this is ours. And I think, you know, I feel really strongly that photography and portrait photography is just incredibly powerful and can be very empowering to kind of like make you visible and to be seen. And the idea that you are seen and you're seen in spaces, that it gives you ownership that can unlock your thinking, so that you're not just like a kid in a world made by grown-ups, but you're like, hey, this is mine. And that's, you know, what I hope that does for them.
And I know, just leading nicely to Neil, I know that you talked a little bit about the big things that you're bringing to Wigan, but I know that you're very involved with the people of Wigan and the ground up approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from a young person perspective, we can't ever kind of translate what they're thinking. You know, we have to get them forefront in terms of really talking to us and telling people and us what they want to see. So we're connected through, you know, the college, the schools, through creative output, through the youth zones, every kind of output where young people are coming together, and we're linking those together in order to have creative advocates. So we've had a program for 2 years where we've been supporting 12 advocates, and they are going to be the kind of makers, the voice of Wigan, and they will be linked back in through those youth networks and allow us to kind of really think about how we make the town and the borough more widely work for them, and to see what they want to come through. And just to pick up on one of those things, I kind of mentioned how the galleries have been taken over by the young people, and a big part of that was just they wanted somewhere to gather. But in terms of what Wayne was saying, you know, they want market space. It's not just about the kind of shop units, which we have done and will continue to do. And as part of the Future High Street project, we're about to, in about 3 months' time, open a new creative space on King Street, which would be amazing and lends a lot from the kind of amazing work that was done in Blackburn. But you know, there are indoor markets which are amazing spaces and provide us with lots and lots of opportunity in the borough and outdoor, and we're fully utilizing that. And that's directly coming from those young people in our borough wanting that space, but not necessarily wanting the big overheads that come if we as a council aren't able to fully unlock rate relief and those things, which absolutely we're looking at how we can do. But I think as well, you know, that point around creativity, understanding place is critical, and it's always transient. There will be markers there that, you know, whether it is manufacture for Blackburn, whether it's something else, there are those markers, but those markers will always change as a place progresses. So it's how you can cope with those and how you can translate those as you go forward as well. And I think one of the elements that we're kind of considering is not just the town centres themselves, but thinking about what other high streets you've got. So we've got Waterways, which is one of the things that Wigan's known for, the Wigan Pier, and you know, we're looking at how can we use that canal network that runs right through the heart of our borough as a new form of high street that connects culturally, creatively, these towns, these creative communities together, and allows that chain. And again, looking across to Lancashire and what they've done with the linear park concept, can we expand that? Can we build that across the Leeds-Liverpool Canal and use that as an alternative powerhouse structure where creativity flourishes through the towns, through the villages that exist across that northern line that runs through that canal? So I think there's lots and lots of things. And again, you know, even within that, the boating community is growing something exponentially in terms of our local area. And it's of real interest in terms of the types of people who are boat owners are also engaging a lot more in our cultural activity, and whether that's the Spinners Mill in Lee, where we've got over 40 creative industries now starting up there. There's massive connections with 50 yards to the canal. So it's how we can make those relationships whilst at the same time making sure that that offer is really, really interesting, vibrant, strong within the town centres as they are.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Could I just bring in some science just to back up on Neil? You know, what he said about markets is absolutely true, but the thing is, what towns and places have to do, it's so easy to empirically prove this as well. And because most towns now have footfall counters, and so many landlords are turning on to what's called turnover rents. So for example, this weekend in London, we do a market for emerging designers called The Drops, and we've proved by looking at footfall counters and by the fact that all the shops around where The Drops is are on turnover rent. So if you work with landlords, and because on an open book basis, you can see that the uplift that they get on turnover rents as a result of increased footfall, which markets bring, because young people, like Neil said, like markets, and young people like trading at them. You can actually then give these markets for free because you can prove. We give out all the market stalls that we do in London now are on a minimal turnover rent. If you don't turn any money over, you pay a deposit, but if you don't turn any money over, you get your money back. And the fact is, but because of this change, and it's a fundamental change in town centres, that landlords are no longer, and it's more so in the bigger cities, but it will go to all the smaller towns, that they are not just charging an annual rental on a property. They're working on turnover rents, and it's better for everybody. And once you do that, towns are about footfall, and so towns have to start. And that's why, you know, the success of, you know, we work with a company called Deco Publique, who are brilliant, two young, well, fairly young, in case they're on here, who understand that it's about bringing numbers into a town. And then the town is happy, because the economic impact is, measuring that economic impact is so important, and we can do it relatively easily.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Wayne, and I think that's something, the learning, what I'm sort of getting from this is that there's a lot of activity, a lot of really interesting, exciting activity. I'm interested also in how do we take the learning from, which is coming from different places, isn't it? We've got Casey with her artistic input, and she's very interested in what is the cultural impact of that. We've got Neil with really wanting to serve the local community and connect them. And then obviously all of the work that you're doing, Ellen, where you're working with very, very different places across the country, looking at the high street. So it'd be great to hear your response to this.
Yeah, I think that was occurring to me as I was listening as well, that there's so much out there at the moment. There is this kind of phase of experimentation, and in those progressive places we're seeing real support for that, and that's brilliant. But if it happens in isolation or in pockets, that's a real shame, because we can take those learnings, while still remembering that really important point that just because it works in one place, it won't necessarily work in the other, because to do it authentically and credibly and really feel like it's of that place, you are looking at those individual initiatives. But I think that there are broad learnings and there are really brilliant ways that we can share that. And I think with the cultural programme, we've got more than 60 high streets, and there are some places that are supported with, you know, council and Arts Council funded cultural development agencies, and they're really firing on all cylinders. But then you have other places where there really isn't a cultural infrastructure, so to speak, and they're using the grant funding that we're giving them as seed funding to really explore what can happen. And what we try to do across the high streets is help them build capacity to do more of this kind of thing, to pair them up, to create ways that they can speak to each other and learn from each other. And also these national commissions that we have, this strand of commissions is deliberately trying to pair, or sometimes more than pair, high streets together, so that they can collectively start to draw upon those experiences. And I think there's a lot to be said for, yes, the practical and logistical side of things, but also just having a network of peers who are going through similar things and being able to draw upon that kind of collective knowledge as well.
And that's really interesting. It brings me back to something that Wayne had said earlier, where he was talking about, instigators, people who have imagination, who have a kind of sense of how they want to go forward. Neil, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Neil, did you want to respond to Ellen?
Yeah, and partly with Wayne's previous point as well. And I think it is right about the instigators too. I was just going to kind of add in that, one of the areas that we've kind of experienced really phenomenally over the last couple of weeks and months is just being able to give free space. So that sort of sense of expanding on the markets and thinking about footfall. So the activity we did in the Gallery Shopping Centre raised the footfall by 5% while we were there. So we've got kind of that same tangible proof, but actually what we were able to do outside of just the spaces and the engagement was to give the back space, what was the storerooms, to bands as rehearsal spaces. And so we doubled up in terms of the usage of those. And that came from, some instigators that we have locally, artist Ellen Al, who have done an amazing job in kind of looking for opportunity. And that's led to the Lathams, who have had a #1 album recently, Stanley's, 3 other amazing bands, all having rent-free space and being able to develop new work, and with a small amount of investment in them to actually record that new work and work towards getting management. So again, these opportunities don't have to be expensive, and particularly for kind of local authorities, it's not always about building that kind of big resource call on you. It is just thinking smartly about how those spaces work, and also the timescales. We know at the moment with a major development that we're going to see approximately a third of the town centre massively impacted for the next X amount of years. So how can we shift within the framework of our town centre and shift activity? And again, on the future high streets, we're looking at what used to be an old solicitors, and before the residential comes in, can we get bands in there? It's nightclubs downstairs. It's not going to make any difference noise-wise. So, how can we just reuse, replay, repurpose those spaces, but do it on a scheduled basis, knowing that it's not always going to be permanent, but we can move that offer around.
So I'm thinking from this, there's a number of things that obviously we hope we can share with people in terms of learning from this particular discussion. And I think there was an interesting question from one of the, if we go to some of the questions that have come through from Lauren, what she was talking about, what happens in those places where there isn't a forward-thinking council, where there isn't that sort of support. And you touched a little bit on that, Ellen. And I know, Casey, I'm going to start with you, because I know when you started this project, you weren't actually working, were you, with local councils and with others to develop the project so much? And you've developed a kind of way of operating where you're actually working with people on the ground now, with colleges, with others on the ground. And I'm kind of very interested in how that's changed the practice as a cultural practitioner that works nationally, how that's changed your practice.
I mean, I think what I used to do is I would just I would go into a space and I would work with a festival or with some cultural organization, and I'd set up my studio and I'd take pictures. But then through the pandemic and through, I just really, it changed how I wanted to work. And I really felt about, I was everybody was stuck at home. And I just thought, I want to work in a way where I'm connected and connecting into local places and collaborating and creating with people. And I want all of the work to be like that. So whenever I go somewhere now, I've been working with local colleges and art schools and art students, and we talk about the ideas about what I'm doing, and we talk about the ideas about how can you reimagine your high street, because my work is so very much about the high street and how we use it. And they all then can respond to these ideas through their own briefs, which has just been amazing. And I also get them to come in, they come and assist me, and it's much more kind of collaborative process now. And I definitely want to plug into what local councils are doing, and what people like Neil Harris is doing in Wigan, and have these discussions so that I become a part of a part of what's happening, and I don't just kind of leave. And I think for me, that whole pandemic time was very much about changing how my practice and how I want to work, and very much wanting to be a part of in the conversation, and just do a lot of listening as well as taking pictures. So,
and I think that kind of, when we're talking about bringing things in, Wayne, there's another question. There's a statement which is about the festival, that you've been touring, you've been working across a number of places developing the festival. And I think this is about the festival in Blackburn, the initial festival in Blackburn, and it's actually sort of the question about, or the idea that the footfall, the counter, went up drastically, but it was only really during the festival that high street footfall went up. So I'm kind of interested in what.
Yeah, but it's like anything. So first of all, the National Festival of Making only takes place in Blackburn. It doesn't tour. It's just there. But it's like everything. You do a festival. You can't do a festival every weekend. They cost hundreds of thousands of pounds on scale to put on. But so if you look at, like, if we're working in Lowestoft a lot at the moment, and we started doing a master plan on the we'll come away from town centres for a second, because it's the same principle, really. So we did a master plan for the South Beach in Lowestoft, and one of the things that is you have to change people's habits. The habit was that people had stopped going to that beach, and so by putting a festival on the beach, it reminds 60,000 people that beach is there. And in the same way that by bringing people into town who hadn't been into town, it's the people who return. So, if somebody comes into a town and enjoys themselves, they're not going to think, I'm going to wait another year till the Festival of Making's on, because people don't think like that. If the town is rubbish, then they're going to do that and say, I'm only going to come in town. But you wouldn't. But towns improve because of these things happening, and so they. Wherever you do these things, you don't just do it that you also do things 365. So Deco Publique in Blackburn will be doing things in the windows of shops and working with schools and bringing that attention all year round. And so it isn't just, and in Blackburn, I think it was something like 6 after the first Festival of Making, and I can't remember when that was, 2015 or whenever it was. Within a year, 6 bars had opened, but mainly by young people in that town centre, in a town that had no nightlife whatsoever, just closed at 5 o'clock. It gives people hope. It gives people confidence. You just got to do things and show people the art of the possible. If somebody is there on a festival weekend having a drink at 7 o'clock in an evening, and they think, what a good day I've had here. They're going to think, well, actually, I might open a bar because I want to do this. And if one bar opens as a result of it, then you've done your job.
And I was thinking, just Wayne, coming back to you, I know the first time I spoke to you on the phone, I was, I just Casey had just done some work in Redcar, and you were doing an event in Redcar, and you were working with Redcar Palace. There was a connection with Redcar Palace. I'm really interested in those kinds of spaces, those sort of spaces where they start with people like Redcar Palace, and they build cultural into the spaces. You know, it felt, to me anyway, Redcar Palace definitely feels like a place where it's people first, and then working with those people to develop actually a fantastic ongoing cultural offer. They have a shop there which is selling makers' work. You know, it's that kind of model.
I mean, sometimes you just have to do something to give people confidence that things can happen in their town. That's all that needs to happen. Ultimately, you know, sometimes a groundswell can happen without any kind of interjection, but sometimes a groundswell just needs that nudge. And so, you know, we tend to go into places and try to nudge that, and then hopefully things can start to happen. And, you know, and I know that's what Historic England are doing, and I would imagine that's what Neil says he's doing as well. Young people want a life, remember. They want to own that house at some stage. Many people want to work for themselves. Look at the growth of Depop. We've got to bring that energy of Depop into our town centres, and it's not impossible because, you know, those thousands and thousands, well, hundreds of thousands of young people who are selling on Depop, going into charity shops, adding it to a bit of their old Primark, however they're doing it, you know, that can be energy that can be harnessed to go into the spaces that Neil's been talking about, to go into the old shops that Ellen is charged with bringing back to life. It's happening, but it doesn't necessarily have to stay online, because young people want to be social, and it's not hard to bring Depop into our towns.
So I'm just thinking about, there's an interesting comment from Mark Walsh, who's talking about a flight kind festival in New Brighton in the Wirral, which he said was amazing, and there was a fair attached to it, but then nothing happened. It sort of just stopped either as well. So I am really, I'm kind of thinking about that, the instigators, and then also those that perhaps are there to support the ongoing instigations. So that making
I'm just going to nip in there, just because it's really important. That it's the word festival can also be meaningless. You know, just doing a festival. You know, why was that kite happening in New Brighton? What was the link to the high street? Do they make kites there? You know, just by having a festival doesn't mean it's going to be a success or have longevity. There's got to be meaning. You know, everybody talks about meanwhile now, but it's also worthwhile. The two have got to go together. You can't just do things because you think, you know, it's like the old-fashioned thing. If I hear it one more time on the coastal resorts that we work in, bring back the air show. Don't bring back the air show. What's it to do? What's it to do with the town? You know, no wonder it lost you a load of fucking money, and it cost you so much, because it was absolutely meaningless and it's not purposeful. It's got to fit with the times, and it's got to be meaningful to the place.
Casey, do you want to come back on?
Yeah, I was just wanted to say that people that from my experience, that young people, they really want to be together physically in spaces, to be in spaces, and that they're, you know, that they want to be out being playful, having fun. You know, it's about like finding joy together in those spaces, that and just being in, you know, claiming your place and having it be like, you know, a laugh, and meeting your friends and meeting people you don't know, just finding out like who you are and what do you want to do with your life. I mean, a lot of times it's about, creating a situation where other people can meet one another. I mean, I think with the portraits and things, having these conversations with young people, and then they have them with each other. And that to me is just, you know, it's totally, it's just revolutionary. It's everything. So for me, to create these physical spaces and say, hey, look, this, you know, it's not an empty shop. Look, it's like a, you know, we put music on and we taking pictures and it's fun. And that to me is where these really important conversations that they will have with each other can happen.
So I think we're kind of coming to the end, and that's a good place to kind of look at closing off. It's about people, isn't it? People and place, and and how relevant what you're doing and what you're supporting is to that place. So I'm wondering if we could possibly ask for everyone for a kind of closing comment, which perhaps could inspire others. I'm very conscious that this could go out to people who feel they would like to be involved, would like to get connected, maybe in places where perhaps there is less forward thinking. So maybe if we could think about closing off with a sort of message or something that we'd like to sort of say is important about the discussion that we could share with others. Is that okay? I'm going to go to Wayne first and give the other panelists time to think, because Wayne always has something very brilliant to say off the cuff. So I'm going to go to you first, Wayne.
Well, I just think the most important thing is to understand, is to delve into what your town and what your place is about, and try to do something that means things to people, and don't just look at what somewhere else is doing. Not everywhere can be. You know, there are only so many ideas, but you can always tailor something, and a lot of councils, I'm talking two councils here, I suppose, just think that they can look at what somebody else does and think that it's going to work there, and it doesn't. You know, I know from the heritage side, from the Historic England side, that there's a very big difference between an action zone in Swindon and one in Lowestoft. And then you have Lowestoft and Great Yarmouth next to each other, and there couldn't be a bigger difference in heritage action zones. You've got to delve deep, and you've got to work with local people. You can't, you know, I think the balance is you bring in people who, towns should bring in people who've done things and know how to deliver, but they can't, but they shouldn't rely on people from outside to come riding in on a white horse to solve that problem. It's got to be that combination of local insight and then the experience that might have happened somewhere else, and if you get that right, it's totally doable. There's one last thing as well, and that's about bravery. You know, the towns that are taking things into their own hands and starting to not just, there's no shortage of money in this world. There is for people who are poor, but there is no shortage of money for towns to borrow. But there is a shortage of ambition, you know, and so towns can obtain assets at the moment. They can buy shopping centres. They can do the deals to do that without it affecting dealing with the health issues of people in the town. But it takes bravery, and it takes having elected members who are progressive, and so what I would advise people always is to make sure that to try and encourage young people to stand for election so you've got progressive people as council members, because ultimately we're determined by that.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Ellen.
Everything Wayne said, and also just have a go, just do it, be brave, as Wayne says, be ambitious. I feel like we're at the beginning of a really new era for high streets, and we can really help to redefine them, but it's about really getting under the skin of that place. And also it's not going to happen overnight, so to acknowledge that there is a slow build, and just creating the space and creating the conversation is part of the work as well, and it isn't wasted.
Fantastic. Neil.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot. I'd say where Wayne left off, actually, that getting those political leaders on side and those within the planning system, you know, planners often get a lot of criticism, and actually they're some of the most creative people I've ever met. It's just the restrictions in which they're having to work often. So I think getting those influential people on side who can drive some of that ambition that does exist everywhere. And really, you know, our role as a local authority is enabling and facilitating that. That's kind of it. And it's to just ensure that those opportunities are there and that we can look at ways of sustaining that. But I think I'd also say, you know, make sure that you've got amazing people around you. We've not talked, there was a comment in the chat about organizations and what happens if your local authority isn't progressive. I mean, we're blessed, we've got some amazing organizations in our borough, and we couldn't do any of the, you know, work that we're trying to achieve without their support and without their kind of input. And people like Casey coming in and working as part of that partnership is really important. So it's fully utilized, you know, those organizations, and they're not always cultural organizations. You know, creative people exist in different types of organizations. So it's really back to that point about insight, understanding, and just drawing the best and drawing those ambitious people into one place to make a difference.
And I'm going to finish with Casey, because one of the things that I think about your work proves, if you actually look at the portraits, is that those young people are confident. They have a sense of themselves, and they have a sense of themselves staring out into space saying, this is me, I'm here, you know. What do you feel their sense of going forward, their sense of possibility is?
I mean, I've seen, you know, that there's been a lot that's kind of they've had it's been a really intense time. It's been a really difficult time, but it looks to me like there's this kind of wild imagination that's bubbling up, and I've just seen so much incredible ways of being in the world, and so much like brave ways of being in the world, with kids in, you know, in northern towns being like not identifying with the gender, and just, you know, this like beautiful wildness. I mean, I see it everywhere, and it's just very it's just totally inspiring. And I think it's really what, you know, what I want to do is just is kind of like empower them so that they can think up these new ideas. What do they want this world to be, you know, because it's for them really. So I feel very excited and hopeful.
And I think that's a brilliant place to leave it. There are other questions. Sorry if I didn't get to everybody's questions, but I think what I feel we've got from this is that there is a real sense that now is the time that actually we need to have these conversations, and we need to think about this, and we need to think about how we take it forward. Thank you very much for your insight. As I said before, we will share this on YouTube, and do send it out to others, because I know that this is a crucial conversation. It's a conversation that we need to have, and we need to have repeatedly. So thank you very much. Thank you everybody for attending, and we'll say goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.